do you transition into commercial? It's like this foreign place for a lot of people. So I think the big question is, what does commercial actually do? What are the types of roles that you could be in the commercial organization? What do they do? And if you can give us a little bit of clarity around that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I honestly think that even though I've been in commercial for a few years, there's still so much more for me to understand and to explore. So I'll give you a little bit of what I know of today, and hopefully that'll be enough information for folks to be able to extend their curiosity to learn a little bit more. The way that I think about the commercial organization is that this is really the organization that is tasked to make sure that when these innovative, helpful, effective products really get to the market, and they get approval, the commercialization team has to be prepared to make sure that it can truly reach the patients. So they need to have a really vast network to know who their customers are, the physicians, what is the landscape, where do the patients exist, and how can we make sure that we can reduce any barriers for them to then be able to receive these treatments that we've worked so hard to get across the finish line. And I think that that's just a very overarching kind of hope for what the commercialization organization is really looking to do. And then, of course, there is the valuation and the revenue component for us to really understand how strong is our business truly performing through the lens of, are we really making sure that we're really reaching all of the patients in need that would really benefit from our treatments. Functionally wise, as many of you know, especially if you work in a large pharmaceutical corporation, the commercialization function and team is usually quite massive. So there's many, many different types of departments that support the overarching goal of commercialization. I think that the way that I like to think of it is that there are folks that work kind of in the headquarter space, and that's where I sit. So I'll start there from the analysis here. Where in the headquarter space, this is usually where we have teams like the strategy and business development. Our task is to look long term, look at our portfolio, and really ask ourselves the question, are we making sure that these products are really going to really be competitive? Are they really differentiated? Are they really fulfilling our long-term vision of what we see we can be ourselves as a player in each of these disease areas? And are we supporting our team strongly enough to make sure that they can execute on those decisions? And so some of the strategy work streams, for example, would be overarching disease areas. So for oncology this year, our strategy refresh is really trying to assess, in terms of the tools that we have and the programs that we have, do we really feel that we can continue to be leaders and make sure that we're providing the best treatments to the patients? So those are some of the types of strategy projects that we do. There's also more technical type of strategy projects as well. When we think about innovative platforms, innovative modalities, our team is the one that's then tasked to really understand them, to connect with our scientific, our development, our clinical teams, to really see what do we know, do we have anything in-house, and what is it that we think that we need? If this is really a modality or a platform that is truly going to bring the next wave of treatments, are we well positioned to be able to deliver on that? And then that's where the BD part comes in, because then we can provide that valuation perspective to say, not only have the clinical and scientific teams said resoundingly that this is an important modality, we also know, based on the number of patients out there in the world, based on what we're seeing in terms of the treatments, that this would also bring a tremendous amount of value back to our business. And so we provide a lot of that commercial point of view on different types of business development projects. And so the strategy and BD teams are usually sitting above the products and above the pipeline, because we really need to be able to see that vision that's long term and have a little bit of a bird's eye view on our business. A lot of the other teams are really focused in on the ground, on the work of our pipeline. And so there's a really large team that works on our product development. And so these are often framed as those that work on the early asset products. So these are ones that are phase one, pre-phase one, in the preclinical space, where we can jump in as a commercial lead, provide a little bit of a preview of what we're seeing of the competitive landscape, what the value may look like, provide even some input on which indications we may want to stagger and prioritize based on what we're seeing on the landscape. And then there's also the late development side, where there's commercial leaders that then are taking this all the way through registrational and then to approval, and then working very closely with the drug development teams to provide a commercial input on how can we really make sure that we're really not only getting approval, but we're really accessing all of the markets and providing all of the market teams what they need to really be able to execute on this product the moment that it gets approved.
So Manting, before you go on, can you clarify a little bit by what you mean by like markets getting access? Because that's maybe a term that not everyone might be familiar with.
Yes, that's a good point because I think that this is where we, even in the commercial world, we have to work in partnership with a lot of different functions, which I have found some of these functions because to think about accessing markets, there's actually a analytics that goes into this. And so when we think about transferable skills, this is a really great path for you to consider because there is a really deep analytics component for us to build the data set to feel confident that we can really be able to go to a health authority in a different country, demonstrate the strength of our clinical trial data, have them approve our drugs, and then really make sure that the patients within that country are really able to then access the medicines. A lot of that knowledge is broken down inside of the actual countries. So in the commercial world, we call all of them markets. So the US market, the European market, the East Asian market, that type of thing. And so when I'm using the term market, I'm usually referencing a country or like a region that's a really impactful space where we know that we have a presence to really impact the patients there. And so in the commercialization world, as we have those late development commercial leads that sit in the headquarters that are helping and addressing those drug development questions to really get it across the finish line. The other half of their work is connecting with the actual market leads across the world, either in the US or outside the world, to then get their feedback to say, what do you think that you need to really make sure that when we submit this in your country, this will also get approval? What do you think that you need in terms of messaging, in terms of understanding the landscape to really make sure that you are as effective as you can be in your role in your region? And so this is where there is also a tremendous market team that's broken down by regions that have that region or country specific knowledge of how to really be able to commercialize our products. And within these market teams, this is where you can think of a little bit more of your like classic commercial roles. Our marketing teams, our sales team, we usually call them our field force. Those are the folks within the classic commercialization world. These are where a lot of those roles sit because when we say they work in the field, they are literally on the ground connecting with the physicians, with the customers to really make sure that they have what they need and understand the benefit that our treatments are able to offer. We have our medical organization that really helps to translate a lot of the science to the physicians. The medical organization is also one of those areas where we see a lot of folks, Joanna, perhaps even like yourself, with a scientific background, swing in to really be able to have that exposure to commercialization. There's also pricing, market access, that team that really understands the nitty-gritty details of the regulatory landscape within each of the countries to inform how our drugs are moving forward. We have a massive analytics component as well. This is where the folks are really generating all the data for us to review. So competitive intelligence, market research, forecasting, these are all these analytics team that really support the commercialization organization to make the best decisions.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you. That was an awesome overview. There's a lot to cover in terms of the commercial organization. And I know we're focusing on what your role is because I think this is a key area that a lot of people could potentially move into with scientific backgrounds. So that's my next question. What do you think is your advantage having a scientific background coming into the commercial organization? And on the flip side, what do you think are some of the challenges that you have faced being on the commercial side?
Honestly, I found that my scientific background has been tremendously helpful. And even when I moved into the commercial world, a lot of folks were noting that there is a move for the commercial organization to want to bring in more folks with scientific backgrounds because we work in this unique industry where we do have to understand the science. That's the bedrock of what we're doing here. And so I found that coming into the commercial organization, one of the greatest value adds that I've been able to provide is being the bridge back to the scientific organization. At the end of the day, we're speaking different vocabulary, we have different priorities, and we have different cultures. So someone that has been working in the R&D space that understands how their world works, what their needs are, and how what their kind of research speak is, that's been very useful for me to be able to then be that communicative bridge between commercial and research back and forth to really highlight if this is where our scientists' heads are at, how do we distill it in a way to help a commercial leader really understand why that's important? That's where my ability of having the scientific background really comes into play. And then I think that's also where my effort to really focus in on my communication skills has really helped me to have that advantage in that space. And so that relationship building that I've been able to carry over has been extremely positive. I also think that, I have such a appreciation for my scientific background too, because I just firmly believe that a PhD, a master's, these graduate programs are really an ability for you to be curious and to ask the right questions. We're never going to arrive to the role having every single skill set. And so it's really how have I been curious to then consider what the real problems are? What do I need to learn? And then having known that I've been able to solve these problems, I think about days in my PhD where my lab was still very young. We didn't have all of the money to have technicians. So I had to learn how to be a technician while trying to finish all of my experiments. And I think about that a lot when I'm facing challenges in the commercial world, because I just think if I can do that, then I can definitely do this too. So it is a real confidence boost for me as well. I think that the challenge here is that this is why I do find the strategy in BD was a fantastic place for me to land in the commercial world, because there is a need to understand the science and to be able to have that communicative bridge so that you can inform the broad strategy for the company in the long-term vision of where we're trying to go. I think that what I look forward to trying to build in is all of those classic commercial skills that a lot of folks have been building their entire career in. So many of us in the scientific world have been going through graduate school, through postdoc, publishing papers, and then going through the research organization to really build our resumes. Folks on the commercial side have been doing the exact same thing. Instead of grad school, they worked in the sales force and really understand the customers very deeply for years and years before they then can get into marketing, and then they can get into the headquarters space and start informing the strategy. So I've started to recognize that there's a lot of folks here with that deep classic commercial understanding of what it really takes to commercialize a drug. And I'm learning about how I can start getting a little bit more of that experience so that while I have the commercial background, in the future, I can feel as confident as I am about being a scientist as I am about being a commercial leader.
That is so huge. I know you and I have talked about that a little bit. When you have a different starting point for your career, you go through different roles, you get different experiences. So when you have a commercial background or a sales marketing background, you hit all those different places in different ways. You learn your customer differently than if, like for you as a scientist, you learn about the science and then are bringing the customer into it. I'll just kind of bring my experience into this because as a pharmacist and even a physician or a nurse, we have a little bit of both worlds because we understand the basics of the science, but then we also, like if for somebody like me who worked clinically, I also understand the patient, I understand the thought process of the physicians, I understand what's happening with the nurses and the whole social work setting, bringing that all together to the commercial organization and even medical affairs, which is where I was before, so huge and so valuable. So bridging the two and building that out for yourself as a basic scientist or clinical pharmacologist as you are, it just comes with time and experience, right? It's a great segue into, I think Joseph asked the question, is an MBA having business acumen considered a plus for those types of roles? If I get another degree, if I get my MBA, will it make me more marketable? And so what is your take on that?
It's a great question. Honestly, I
It
gotta
is.
say, I still ask myself that question. My dad still asks me that question of when I'm getting an MBA. At the end of the day, where I stand is it's very personal of whether you want to put in that commitment and that time to really get it. And if there is that belief that you need it to be competitive and to be differentiated, I'm a little bit different at my stage of my career now because I think that an MBA would have been extremely useful if I stayed in R&D and then wasn't sure of how to navigate it. If BMS didn't have these great rotational programs, if they didn't have these great networking opportunities for me to then find my way into the business side of the business, I think that an MBA would have been pretty critical for me. I think that there's a lot of folks also that don't have other graduate degrees that then feel that getting an MBA helps them to demonstrate that business acumen right from the upstart because you have that degree. And so it helps to message your passions as well as your abilities pretty quickly in a way that a PhD would for applying to a scientific job. So I think that it really depends on how you see yourself in your workplace and how easy or challenging it might be to get into the side of a business. I don't think that it's always necessary. I have found it very useful for some folks that have been trying to break into marketing and trying to break into that side of the classic commercial world. Even as I've navigated my own networking conversations to get more onto the market side, I have received that question of whether or not I have an MBA. And I usually then just ask them right back, do you think I need one? And I always am just open to hearing more feedback because today I might say no, but then in the future that might also change as well.
Mhm. Oh my gosh, Manting, I love that. I love how you flip it back on them. Like, do you think I need one? That's an awesome response. I'm kind of the same thought process as you. Like, I don't know that it's necessarily absolutely necessary to have an MBA to make a change because I think different people passively diffuse, like, gather information to make the shift in different ways, depending on how you grow in your current career and your current role, what opportunities get you are able to advocate for yourself. Like for in your example, it was a rotational experience. For others, other places don't have that. So getting the opportunity to be on a cross-functional team where you get the visibility and you get the exposure to other functions and how they think, and then fostering those relationships and learning from them in the attempt that maybe somebody will take you under their wing, give you a stretch assignment that you can work on, or at least get more exposure, shadow experiences, whatever it might be. And I talk a lot about those strategies, and we cover a lot of those strategies in my career transition program that I run because it's so critical if you want to be able to make a career change. You have to find that experience in some way. We have one question that says if we have the team that supports the commercial organization as the front of the house for commercialization, what's the fundamental knowledge that's required for that role? Do you have anything additional to add, Manting, to that? Like the fundamental knowledge for a marketing or a payer value access strategist? Any thoughts there of what you could share?
Yeah, in terms of fundamental knowledge, I think that I'm the type of person that's often walked into these roles without the fundamental knowledge, to be honest. I think that what I've often tried to hone in on is the transferable skill set because the fundamental knowledge is often what's inherent to understand how to execute that role in the most successful way. The fundamental knowledge was really just understanding how to build relationships with different cross-functional stakeholders to make sure that all of them are able to provide their vision and their input on what their belief is around an asset, modality, or disease area. Of course, walking in with some of the inherent knowledge around that specific disease area is always useful as well. But then also having the ability to then know how to present and really connect with senior leadership stakeholders as well. I think those are what I would say would be really helpful and sometimes a prerequisite for some of these roles. Perhaps if you meant front of the house, like in terms of like the actual sales and marketing role, there might be some fundamental knowledge, but I might have to chat with some of my sales and marketing friends so that I don't speak outside of my expertise here.
Yeah, I could answer that since you're talking really about a sales field-based role. Medical science liaisons are very similar to that. You're a client-facing role. So depending on the role that you're playing and what your job is, whether you're an MSL, whether we have like payer access, people that are in the field too, whose job is to try to get drugs on formulary. So they have to be able to speak that talk with formulary decision makers. And then there's the salespeople whose primary client is the physician to write scripts, pharmacists to support education and knowledge and adverse event management. So a lot of it is exactly what Manting said. It's communication. It's being able to talk about the science in a way that is meaningful to the person that you're talking to, which in this case would be a physician. It could be a physician scientist, it could be a pathologist, it's different people. It just depends on who the audience is and being able to articulate that information in a way that's digestible for them. I want to make sure we get to the real key question. What advice do you have in terms of pathways that people could take who have scientific backgrounds, PhDs? We heard a little bit about the path you took to move into commercial. What other advice do you have? What other pathways have you seen? And what advice do you have for the group if they're really interested in trying to make a change and move into the commercial organization?
So I've seen a lot of folks with PhDs that actually haven't even touched the R&D organization, and they followed a route where they would go to a consulting firm that supports a lot of healthcare businesses and then work on projects that help these healthcare businesses like BMS form their strategies for their commercial projects. And so you start to just jump on projects that give you direct exposure to what a sponsored business looks like, how they run it, what their concerns are. And so a lot of folks first build their resume into the commercial world by working in a consulting firm, working on projects like this to really support the commercialization initiatives that large companies or small companies are really driving at in the commercial function. After that consulting health firm stint, then they usually come in through some type of an analytics role, competitive intelligence, market research, and forecasting. These are roles that I've seen a lot of folks with PhDs land in because it's a very analytical role. Like competitive intelligence, you're just trying to map out where are all of your peer pharma playing in so that we can then figure out the best outcome for our internal strategy. Forecast itself is quantitative. Honestly, having modeling background is extremely useful for me because I already have an inherent understanding that every model has assumptions and you always have to challenge them to really trust the output. And so I think that you can look towards these types of analytical functions as well to, again, be a very important and critical stakeholder for a commercial lead on a project to then understand once I deliver this analysis to you, how are you going to use it? And then you start to build your understanding of what matters to some of the commercial leads on the projects that you're working on. Then they do get MBAs to demonstrate that without going through the process of rotating through different teams to gain a little bit of that business acumen. They get the business acumen through a degree, and then you can already show right on your resume that you already have that understanding for how a business would need to operate to be successful on top of your research capabilities. And then you start going through different functions like even business development or transactions, where you're really putting a lot of these cross functional pieces together. Commercial is one part of the stakeholder, and of course, an important one in a lot of the BD deals that folks are doing. You can almost have one leg in the science world and then one leg in the business and really start to absorb the commercial knowledge to then find a way to swing in. So, in a way, that was kind of like what I had done with my tour of duty and search and evaluation, and then moving into the commercial organization as well. I would just be remiss without acknowledging that the reality of what I've seen too for people to be successful from this is really developing a rich network in the team that you want to move towards. So I think maybe that would be one piece of advice I would share to everyone that my interview strategy is often having already had a one-on-one with everyone on the team, including the manager, by the time I arrive to the interview, because these types of impressions I think can really matter as they're reflecting on who they want to bring onto the team. And so making sure that you connect with the team, that you connect with your stakeholders so that you arrive being able to speak knowledgeably about what work they do while acknowledging that the whole point of applying to the role is because you want to learn more about it and to gain that skill set. So I think that would be one thing that is underpinning all of this, I think, in all the folks that I've seen being able to navigate this successfully, having a really good network, mentors, sponsors that help you along the way.
Yeah. And I just want to clarify because you mentioned your interview strategy. It's not, oh, I'm going to interview for this role and because you're internal, it's an internal role. You had already nurtured relationships prior to that. They knew who you were, you nurtured it, and then you were applying for a role. So your purpose of that one-on-one strategy before the interview is really to understand what's important to the team so that you knew how to answer some of the questions that you would be coming into too. And they also got another impression of you too. So I just want to clarify that because I think a lot of times people think I have to start networking because I want to move into this role. And the whole point of networking is to nurture relationships along the way so that when the time comes and the right opportunity comes, people are thinking of you, they already know you, they already trust you, and it's easier to kind of move into those types of roles. I want to make sure that we touch on, does it matter what your PhD's in? So if you have a PhD in chemistry, could it be useful in a competitive intelligence role or BD versus a PhD in biology? Any
Yeah,
thoughts?
that's a really good question. I would say no. honestly, because I think that whatever PhD you get will be extremely valuable. It's going to teach you a lot about that particular space, and you might be surprised by how useful it might be. For example, I can see both chemistry and biology being extremely useful in the world of BD. The way that we're often looking at molecules now, especially more advanced modalities, requires you to have some level of understanding around the chemical or the biological component of these molecules. And so I would say that it doesn't necessarily matter what your PhD is in. It will always help if it's more aligned with a disease area or a business unit that you would want to move towards. My old tour of duty manager did his PhD in cancer biology, and now he works in oncology. So that's a very nice, conducive continuity of the learnings that he had gained and then how he's able to apply it. But at the end of the day, to me, a PhD just proves that you know how to answer questions that have never been answered. And I really like to lead with that because I still find that a lot of commercial folks don't even really understand what a PhD is. And that's what I tell them. You don't have to think of me as a pharmaceutical scientist. I'm someone that can answer scientific problems in pharma.
Oh my gosh, I love that, Manting. That was a great perspective on that. And it kind of leads into Layla's question around transferable skills. How do you identify those? PhDs are taught critical thinking, analytical skills, problem solving, how to find solutions to questions we've never answered before. So much value can be driven from that. Those are huge transferable skills that if you can generate a story like you have done, Manting, so beautifully today, around that and be able to speak to that, people can't argue with that because we need humans that can still critically think and come up with novel solutions. And I'm not going to go down the AI route today because I don't want to go there, but that's what's needed, especially if we're going to solve problems for patients. Do you have any other thoughts about identifying an individual's transferable skill sets and how to effectively present those skills?
I think that if you're able to speak to folks doing the groundwork on the teams that you want to move in, so not thinking about senior leaders, not thinking about managers, but the folks that are really driving the projects, find them, talk to them, ask them what their day to day looks like. What are the challenges that you're often facing? And then as they articulate that and tell you these stories, what I've usually done then is reflect back on myself and think, how would I have solved this problem? And then I just in my mind start building out a list of transferable skills that I believe I have based on some of these stories that these folks are able to share. So that's what I had done in the world of BD. I realized the transferable skill of clinical pharmacology, tremendous. This is a really big piece in the world of drug development now to understand how to properly dose a drug and make sure that's already embedded in all of your clinical trials. So I think that through these stories of learning what the challenges people have, you start to map out what your transferable skills are. And my method has often been just sitting down and building those relationships and that trust so that people will share these stories with me and then I can sound back out. This is why I'm asking. And do you think that this would be a useful transferable skill? And then I get that feedback from them and then I build the confidence that, hey, this is actually a really important transferable skill. I better make sure I mention it on my interview or if I actually talk to a manager.
Awesome. Love it. I want to segue into something. If you're applying for a role outside of your current company, how do you go about having one on one meetings with home office or hiring managers and others in the group prior to an actual interview? Do you have any thoughts on that, Manting? I have some, but I will let you start.
I would ask if I could meet the hiring manager during the interview. I would ask to meet the team, and then I would then offline send them a note or send them a LinkedIn chat. And that's what I had done even in the world of Clin Farm when I was first cold applying to a lot of different jobs. The folks that I connected with were then very willing to connect offline with me and to even help my application in the background. And so those were ways that I was able to connect more with the team without actually being a part of the company. I did have to leverage things like LinkedIn. I did have to leverage things like mentors, networks, and things like that.
I completely agree. And I'll start by saying it's about nurturing your network before you need them. So, staying as much in touch with people as you can, whether you're in the company or outside the company, keep in touch with people who have left, keep in touch with people who are still there, and nurture that so that when you come to reach out to them, they'll be responsive to you. The other thing that Minting mentioned is LinkedIn is one of the best resources for your professional brand, your personal brand, and being able to network with people you don't know anymore or you don't know at all. There's great ways to leverage LinkedIn to network in a way that feels authentic to you, that doesn't feel like you're always asking for something. And like I said, always nurturing it. Even if you're not looking for a job, like I am preaching to the choir about building a personal brand and a professional brand on LinkedIn because I think we're underutilizing it when it comes to our professional selves and really establishing ourselves as thought leaders in certain spaces. It's a great way to get in touch with people that you might be interviewing with in the future, as well as just making amazing connections with new people that will keep you in mind in the future for roles or opportunities or whatever it might be. I will ask you one thing for you now, having been in the commercial organization, what are you thinking about next? Is that a fair
Yeah.
question?
Yeah, it is. Honestly, it really is a fair question. I think that part of me is realizing that the way that I'm growing is having this very strong scientific and research background that when I first moved into the world of BD and commercial, I felt like I was running so hard to gain the expertise in these new areas that I almost forgot just how important it is for me to really make sure that I carry along my scientific expertise along the way. And that's a part of why I'm so glad to be in the strategy and BD side of commercial first, because I can really start tying a lot of those elements of my background together. And part of that means that as I think about what I can do in my future, I'm very grateful to have swung into the world of commercial and appreciating how much time a lot of my colleagues and mentors have spent in really learning the heart of what it takes to commercialize a product. I'm exploring the different paths that I can take to gain a little bit more of that insight, that fundamental knowledge, experience a little bit more about the marketing side or the sales side, learning a little bit more about how our medical and pricing and access colleagues actually work in concert together with the product teams. I think that these are all things that I'm really looking forward to. As I'm moving forward, I'm hoping to gain both market experience as well as drug development experience and really going back to the drug development team, not as a clinical pharmacologist, but this time as a commercial lead and really trying to be able to feed in that point of view. So that's what I have looking in the horizon. After that, a little bit less clear. We'll see how it goes.
Always got to be thinking ahead, right? So
Yeah, exactly.
all right, we have time for one more question from Anandi. What does your day-to-day work life look like?
Yeah. So I think that this week, for example, knowing that our overarching goal is to be able to provide the company a perspective on what our strategy should look like to be able to provide the best treatment for diseases based on what modalities we might have or not have, and assets that we have and assets that we might want to get. A lot of the work that I'm doing is connecting with the actual scientists and the clinical teams and even our commercial product teams to really understand where is our pipeline at right now and having a lot of focused conversations around what are the problems that you're seeing, what are the challenges that you're seeing in the landscape, and how can we pull this together to put together one, two, three strategy imperatives that we can bring to the leadership to say, hey, we have all these products, for example, to treat multiple myeloma, but we know that this is a key area that we also want to focus on. What we're hearing from the scientific team and what we understand from the commercial landscape is that it would be critical to execute on A, B, and C. And then these are the ways that we try to bring that together.